maybe give me a thumbs up if it's good, and you can also still see me. Okay, good. All right, so
let me just hop in here really quick. If for some reason you can't see the whole image, if you move your cursor on the right of the screen, it should scroll down, and scroll to the right. And if you put your cursor toward the bottom of the screen, it will scroll down so you can see the whole image. Okay. And one last point, and then I'll officially hand off the mic to you, Michelle. Okay. Please feel free to comment. Throughout, there will be some pauses throughout. But if for some reason something comes to you, or something's not clear, or you have a question or a burning point that you want to make, feel free to just hop in. Mm-hmm. Okay. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you for that. All right. So let me go to the page. This is the focus of my work, expanding the lens that we use to see and understand organizations, from seeing them only as machines to seeing them as living systems, and really expanding the story. The machine story has been useful. There's partial truth to it, but there's more to the story. And the rest of the story about life, is actually the more interesting and more powerful part of the story. So specifically in bringing this expanded story to the world, I and others, but my particular focus is on this concept that's called thrivability. And again, there are others that are bringing this to the world. There's a growing global community of champions that are promoting thrivability. For me, I define it as the intention and practice of aligning organizations with how life thrives. And in this, there are two really key points for me in this definition. One is intention, is really being aware and committed to stewarding life, to that role and that view of organizations. And the other is practice, that even though there are useful guiding frameworks like the one that I'm going to share in a bit, ultimately stewarding a living system is an ongoing practice. It's a practice like a meditation practice or a yoga practice or martial arts, of growing continuously in wisdom and compassion and the ability to sense what's needed in the living system. So I do this, I bring this message of organizations as living systems and thrivability as the intention and practice. I bring it to the world in a variety of ways. I do research, I write articles and blog posts. I'm agonizing at the moment over the last few paragraphs of a book that's been 10 years in the making, so it's exciting and truly agonizing. I accompany a small number of organizations in Montreal within a local community of practice of organizations and organizational leaders that are committed to thrivability, and I'll tell you some stories about a couple of those in a bit. And I guest lecture at 2 local universities every semester, and I host public conversations on a regular basis, including acting as the co-founder of a global conversation series called The Thrivable World Quest. And I'm excited that our Berlin host, Karen, is with us today, and as well as Eric, who's just participated in Berlin. It happens every 2 months, and it's an exploration of the different facets of organizations as living systems as we see them. So I basically evangelize, this view any way I can, a variety of ways, and I've been at it for almost 15 years. And before that, before taking on this challenge, I was pretty deep in the corporate world. I worked for 2 large multinational corporations doing brand strategy and marketing. And then I moved into organizational development as an external consultant for a range of organizations. And in both of these roles, I really felt the machine story and the damage that it can do, the limitations that it presents. And for me, in my personal experience, the limitations and damage of the machine story alone took the form of chronic abdominal pain that doctors couldn't explain, and that mysteriously disappeared as soon as I quit my corporate job. So this was sort of an indication to me of the disconnect between the experience I had within the machine story and my values, and what I saw as possible in how we engage with our customers, how we engage with our employees, and really with each other, how we see organizations. So I really became convinced that this machine story might just be at the root of all the problems, the major problems we face in the world. And so I felt compelled to figure out what else is there. You know, if that's not the whole story, then what else is there? And my instinct was that what else is there? There's life. There's life in our organizations. But I needed to understand, what does that mean? You know, that an organization or that anything is alive. What does that involve? What does it take for any living system to be alive and to thrive? And then what would we do with that information if we had it? You know, how would that serve us on a practical level and be useful? So those were the questions that drove me into the research that led to the content and the framework that I'll share with you today. So that's been my journey over the past 15 years. And you can imagine 15 years ago that things were pretty different, and that it was pretty hard to bring this message into the world, much harder than it is now. And so I'm really excited at the changes that I've seen, especially over the past 5 years. You know, now no one is asking anymore whether the sustainability movement is just a fad. You know, we've accepted that corporate social responsibility is an imperative. And we're even finding that the language of living systems is becoming more and more common. Things like resilience and adaptability, collective intelligence, these are really capacities of life, of living systems. So it's really exciting times. And I also find in my experience working with organizations, and just my sense in general, is that we're not out of the woods yet. That there's kind of a lot of excitement and enthusiasm to race ahead into practice of new ways of working, and that's fantastic, and we learn a lot from that. But I also find there's value in really digging deeply into what we understand to be a living organization. What are the implications of that for us? What does it mean to see an organization as a living system? So I find that there's value in conversations like this to make sure that we really integrate those principles, and we don't risk carrying forward the machine story in subtle ways that we're not even aware of. We don't risk settling for compromises that stop short of what's really needed, and we don't miss out on the creativity and the energy that's released when we're really in a stance of stewarding a living system with intention and as a life practice. All right. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about this machine story very briefly. You know, I make reference to it, and I wanted to share one example of what I'm talking about. If you went to business school, you might have learned about Six Sigma, or maybe just if you're a fan of management literature and practices. So Six Sigma is a popular and very widespread approach to quality management in particular, but it's used across organizations. Across thousands and thousands of organizations. And within Six Sigma, there's a model called the SIPOC model. SIPOC stands for suppliers, inputs, processes, outputs, and customer. And I hope you can see it on your screen. So in this model, which is linear, it goes only in one direction of flow. In that model, this is you. You are a supplier of inputs that are put into the set of processes and infrastructure that are considered to be the organization, and only those are considered to be the organization. You are separate from the organization, and this concept, this image, makes me think of a meat grinder. You know, so you're kind of you're putting your talents and your passions, your inputs into this machine, and somebody's turning a crank at the side, and out the other side, it's spitting out some outputs that go to a customer who's also external to the machine. right? And if it's not working, then let's re-engineer it. So it's been a really useful and simplified framework and model, but it's clearly not the whole story, right? Because excluded from this model are really important things like nature and community and passion, creativity, the things that make us human and alive and that make it worthwhile to come together in organization, the real reasons that we do that. So again, it's useful to some degree, but not when taken as the full story of organizations. And last example of the machine story is the language that we use. And even I struggle to find language to replace it, but talking about people as human resources and human capital, as employees, which means a thing being employed or used, and talking about managing talent as if it's a commodity that can be managed, aside from the person who brings it. And then my least favorite actually is this common phrase, our employees are our best assets, which is supposed to be a great compliment, and I just don't find it to be. I'd like to be considered a human being and not an asset. So these are some examples of how the machine story is pervasive beyond even our awareness often. So then what's the alternative? If we believe that an organization is a living system, then let's see what are the characteristics of living systems and what's some of the language that we might use. I'm going to go through these 4 characteristics quite quickly, and we'll go into them in a little bit more detail in an organizational context. But I find that they are intuitive and simple. They, at least to me, it just sort of, as we go through it, makes sense. But it's powerful to have awareness of these core characteristics of living systems, because then we can work with them. These are the conditions that we need to create if we want a thriving, living organization. So the 4 core characteristics are, first, that any living system has individual parts, like cells in our bodies and the different species in a rainforest and bees in a hive. And if we want the living system to thrive as fully as possible, then we want to invite diversity. The bees do different things. They serve different functions. There are different kinds of bees, different species. So it's a clear message from the world of biodiversity, and it's true in our organizations as well. The second characteristic of living systems is that those parts come together in relationship with each other and with their surrounding context. I learned not long ago that bees communicate and create a pattern of interaction by dancing. There's a special bee dance, and I think that's fun and wonderful. So this is one of the core characteristics, a dynamic but consistent pattern of relationship. Dynamic in the sense that if the living system is to thrive, there has to be a certain level of responsiveness and adaptiveness, but consistent enough that there's coherence. So the third characteristic is that these diverse parts come together in a pattern of relationship in a way that creates a whole, a new level of life, a new level of wholeness. So in our bee example, this is the hive, meaning not just the structure that is the hive, but the superorganism, the collective of bees that now has new capabilities and characteristics that we don't find at the level of any one bee. So together, the superorganism that is the hive of bees has the capability to find the best source of food, or find the best new place for the hive structure, or to moderate the temperature of the hive structure. And this isn't something that any one of the bees could do. So this is kind of what we're after in organizations when we come together, right? That the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That when we come together, we're capable of new things that none of us showed up with. So with these first 3, with the concept of diverse parts in dynamic relationship, in creation of an emergent level of life and wholeness, we actually could be talking about my car. My car has different parts. They do different things. They're in relationship with each other, with me, with the road, and all of that comes together to create this new thing that is called a car, a vehicle, and has the new capability to move me around town. But my car will never have a great idea. My car will never be my friend. My car will never heal itself or respond to totally unexpected circumstances. It will never generate itself. It can never create a new car. So for all of those things that are really the great promise of any living system, including an organization, we need something else, right? We need this spark of life that animates any living system. The thing that some biologists call a self-integrating property. And it's really a sort of fancy phrase to say that by itself, the living system integrates the diverse parts into an emergent, convergent whole in dynamic relationship internally and externally. And that gets us those emergent and new capabilities and characteristics. So those are the characteristics that we find in any living system. And for me, the important thing about naming life, about recognizing that life is self-organizing, self-integrating, and it needs to be present if we're to get what we want from a living system, is that it invites us into a stance not as those people cranking that meat grinder machine. You know, we're not engineers and mechanics. We are stewards. We are gardeners, and we can't create life, but we can invite it by nurturing and cultivating those other three fertile conditions, by creating the conditions for parts to bring the fullness of their diversity, and for relationship to be open and free-flowing, for wholeness and convergence to be possible. So those are our characteristics, and just presented in a different format. This is the four of them: divergent parts in dynamic relationship, creating convergent wholeness, and all powered by life. So let me pause before I start to get into how these are present in organizations more fully and see if there are questions. No questions. Okay. Oh, we have a question.
This is Matthew. I will just add that what brought Michelle into our radar here at Mycelium originally was a TED Talk that she offered on the pattern of living systems, which if you haven't seen it, we'll put it into the thread and email it out later. It's a really powerful, really dynamic presentation of these four characteristics in flow, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about later too. But I just found that as such a powerful invitation to life and to business and to education. So yeah, there's more of that there.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's also a slideshow I can share that that goes into these in more detail in a general context. So let's jump to organizations. How are these conditions present specifically in organizations? So I like to use the metaphor of a tree. I find it's powerful and useful. So in that metaphor, I imagine that the roots represent those divergent parts, represent the people within organizations. And we know that a tree needs a diverse root base, a broad and diverse root base, to find different sources of nutrients and also just to hold up the structure of the tree. So in my mind, I imagine this is the people within, what we traditionally call the employees. I imagine that the branches and the leaves and the fruit represent the level of wholeness. In an organization, what brings people together and transforms them from being a shapeless crowd of diverse people into a single organism, you know, that is an organization, a living organization. What does that is shared purpose. It acts like a magnet to hold people together around that shared cause or purpose, and generally it's to serve a customer or a community and make some offering to that customer or that community. So here in the metaphor of the tree, I imagine that the fruit of the tree is like that offering, and it's that invitation to the customer to come in and become part of this ecosystem that is the organization and bring the life that they have to bring. And then in the metaphor, I imagine that the trunk of the tree represents the supportive and connective infrastructure of relationship. And what's really interesting about the tree metaphor, kind of useful, is that the majority of a trunk of a tree is actually dead. Most of it is dead. There's just a thin layer of living tissue right under the bark that's called the cambium, which is also my company name. And this is where life flows, from roots to leaves and from leaves to root. So the rest of the trunk of a tree is actually dead. But it's useful and it's important. It's vital. It's vital supportive infrastructure, right? To hold and raise up the leaves to the light and life of the sun. And so in the same way, we can think about organizational infrastructure, that most of the connective infrastructure is the non-living aspect of the organization, the desks and the cash registers and the retail space and org charts. The things that support us in being in connection are not actually where the life resides, right? But it's important connective and supportive infrastructure to bring our offering out into the world, right? In our metaphor and our fruit, and invite in the light and life that our customers bring in the form of money and conversation and opportunities and relationships. So we can see that with this metaphor, it becomes even more clear that the whole system, the whole ecosystem is the organization, is the living organization, and not just the infrastructure that the machine story would tell us. And in that system, life resides where the people bring it in. It resides with the people. It resides throughout. But the reason I emphasize this point is that in traditional organizations, and especially those that are visibly very bureaucratic, this is because we're in service of the infrastructure, that the work exists in order to further the infrastructure. And really it needs to be the opposite, that the infrastructure is clearly in service of life, of the people within, and of the customers and community being served. All right, so I'll go into even more detail and share the full framework next. But again, I just want to pause and see if you have comments or questions. Does it make sense? All right. Okay. Do you want to say something, Matthew?
Well, if you do get into this in the future, then just let us know. But I'm curious, since it seems like for the kind of linear Western mind, it feels like it's much easier to just put people into parts and into roles and hierarchy, and you do this. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if you have anything to offer about that kind of transition from linearity to complexity. Any ways that you've seen, and you may get into case examples in a bit, but if you've seen patterns or principles that facilitate that transition.
Mm-hmm. I think this may be part of the life practice that I was talking about. And you know, as you mentioned that, I think about the number of clients I have whose leaders are Buddhist or lived in Asia or just had early exposure to less linear, more systemic thinking. So I think that's a really valid point. That's part of the challenge, is sort of shifting to a more systems orientation. Is that enough for now? I can mention some more later as well.
Great for now. Thank you.
All right. So the framework, so that we know a bit more detail about how do we create those fertile conditions at those three levels, right? So if I carry forward that tree metaphor and we start with the roots, here, as we're engaging the divergence, inviting people to bring the fullness of who they are into their work, we think about this as their passion. How do we invite passion among people working within the organization? And it's guided by questions like, how can we serve the project, but also how can the project serve us? Because we are part of the ecosystem that is the organization as well. So the first, we'll get into those conditions. Let me finish the tree metaphor, carrying it over. So then as we transfer that, the branches and the leaves as that service to the customer, we already talked about how really this is the purpose, that brings us together, that creates wholeness, and that's represented by our offering into the world. So this is where we ask, who are we serving, and what is our project, and why is it important? Why is it worth doing? Why is it important to those customers? And then that trunk in our metaphor, the space of infrastructure and connection, we think about that as practical play, because it's a mistake to assume that play is the opposite of work. Play is how we learn best, how we collaborate best, how we innovate best. So it's really a useful stance, a useful approach as we think about our patterns of interactions. How can it be playful, but not in a frivolous sense, in a very practical sense? How can we invite the joy that we feel in situations of play as one of the signals that we're thriving, right? So here we're asking, what is our playground? What is the infrastructure? What are the playing pieces that we need? What are the rules that we agree to? So if we dive into passion in a bit more detail, we see that one of the conditions that's needed for people to feel passion, to bring the most of themselves into their work, is mastery. People want to feel that they're good at their job, that they bring their talents, right? And are able to express them. And in each of these, there are levels of depth that we can get into. Here we see it's not just about doing your job well, it's about bringing something of yourself to your work, like a master craftsman. And it's about having beginner's mind, right? A craftsman, a master craftsman is never finished learning. So how can I bring those elements into my work? So as organizational leaders, I'm not prescribing and sharing this framework. This is what you must do in order to create the conditions for mastery. But this is the quest that you take on in designing your system. How in this organization, in these circumstances, with these people, can we invite mastery? How can we create the conditions for mastery? And how can we look around and learn from other organizations? But really, how can we create the specific conditions for mastery that are appropriate for us? So beyond mastery, people also want to feel a sense of membership. They want to feel that they're connected to a great team of people, and also feel membership with their customers and the community that it exists within. So the more layers and levels of membership and belonging we can create, the more of themselves that people will bring in service of the organization. And the third fertile condition that has to be cultivated continuously if we're to invite the fullness of people's passion is meaning. People want to feel deeply proud of what they do, that it's more than just a paycheck, right? That there's something worthwhile in what they do, and that they would probably do it even without the paycheck. So these are the conditions to invite that we found through research and through all of these years of experience and fine-tuning this framework: mastery, membership, and meaning. So then if we go up to purpose, and this is about engaging the customer and inviting them to bring their life and their commitment into the organization as well, then the first condition that we can cultivate is an offering, right? The fruit that we talked about. What is our contribution to that customer? And here's where maybe Six Sigma is really useful. This is where we are continuously improving and continuously learning and responding, right? As we make our offering. But if we stay here, and for many years, this is where most organizations stay, just improving the features of their offering, it's a dangerous place to be, because your competitors are all also doing the same thing, also continuously improving. So it runs the risk of becoming just a commodity and going only to price competition. And that's a terrible place to be as a business, as an organization. So if we want to engage our customers more fully, then we also have to offer some kind of meaningful connection, some conversation, some sense of community, so that they feel that your offering is really for people like them, and that they feel understood and they feel special in their interactions and relationship with you. And best of all is if their sense of connection and relationship is not only with your company, but with other customers as well. So it starts to form a tribe and a community. and informs their identity to some extent. And we all have examples of companies that we adore, and we're proud to wear their clothing and to tell people this is the kind of person I am because I have this connection and relationship with this company. And if we want even more loyalty, even more engagement on the part of our customers, then we give them a heroic cause. We stand for something, we represent something truly meaningful to them, truly meaningful in the world, so that they're happy that we exist, even if they're not customers for our product, but just sell me something, it's sort of the sentiment. I'm just happy that you exist. So I have 2 points I'd love to make about this set of fertile conditions. One is that it doesn't have to be charitable, this heroic cause. It doesn't have to be the obvious protecting the environment or serving an underprivileged community. Those are fantastic and very powerful. But I like to share the example of Harley-Davidson as an organization that really nails all 3 of these powerfully. They make technically excellent motorcycles, so their contribution is really compelling on its own. But they also are really skilled at building a sense of community among Harley owners. There's the Harley owners group, and my husband has a Harley actually, so I know what these people are like. And they're get-togethers, and there's quite open communication and a sense of community. And the heroic cause there for the 35-year-old lawyers and accountants that make up the majority of Harley-Davidson's customers, the heroic cause for them is the sense of rebellion and independence and the open road that the company and the motorcycles represent. So I just want to share that because even though I think we all are committed to social benefit and environmental benefit, we can maybe expand the set of values that we're tapping into as well beyond the obvious and think about what else is meaningful to people. The other thing I wanted to share about this set in particular is that when we started using this framework, we went in sort of linear fashion, starting with contribution. What's the product that we want to sell? How could we connect people around it? And then how could we slap on a heroic cause on top of that? And in the past few years, we have discovered that it's so much more powerful when we start from the other direction. When we ask, what do we stand for? What are we just incredibly passionate about? What's the problem in the world that drives us? Where's there a community of people around it? And how could we contribute to that community and that conversation? And then finally, what's the offering that we alone could make? What is something that we could contribute to this cause that no one else can and that we're passionate to do? So I just wanted to offer that as kind of an entry point to using this framework. So the final row is the infrastructure, practical play. And first, we start with structure. What is the support and what is the connectivity that we need, the support most of all here, to connect our mastery with our contribution? So do we need, as I said earlier, desks and computers? Do we need retail space? Do we need a website in order to bring our talents and our passions in service of our customers and making our offering? So you might notice that just as the tree roots and branches are mirror images of each other, trying to do this in a natural way, the framework offers that mirror image as well. So here, this column is really focused on the very tangible aspects of the organization. How do we get our offering out into the world, and what is the stuff that we need to do that? In the next condition that we need to cultivate, this is the space of flow. What are the systems of interaction that we need? What is the customer service protocol that we're going to have? Will people be forced to listen to 3 or 4 menu choices from an automated system, or will they always get a human? What's the system that we choose to create membership and connection? Who has authority within our employee base to respond to customer needs. These are system issues. What is our email system? What is our meeting structure? How do we structure agendas? Who gets to set agendas? And what's valid to discuss during meetings? So these are system issues that are helping to connect us to each other within the organization, and also helping to connect us to customers, and possibly connecting them with each other. And the last one is what we call sustainability, and it does touch on environmental and social sustainability, but most of all, it's a sort of larger concept of this idea of sustainability in the sense of learning and evolution. Do we have disciplines and practices in place to help us respond and adapt, to ensure that there's coherence across all aspects of the organization, and transparency, so that the organization can sustain itself over time? It can learn and respond and ensure coherence, most of all. And finally, the last piece is this concept of stewardship, this stance and practice and intention of stewardship, so that as leaders and as organizational designers, we recognize that we're sort of, we're cultivating all of these different conditions in service of life, and in the act of sensing what's needed in any of these areas of the organization, aspects of the organization over time. And sometimes stewardship calls for really decisive action, and sometimes it calls for a hands-off approach and trusting in life's process. And so there's wisdom to be cultivated to know when one is called for and when another approach is called for. So I think of this grid as a little bit like charting your garden. You know, I have a little container garden, but if you have a big plot of land, I know that the practice is to sketch out during the winter. Here's where I'm going to put the broccoli. Here's where I'm going to put the beans. This is where the squash will go. This is what naturally goes together. So these are like the garden plan, and they're prompts to the questions to consider as you're stewarding this living organization. And as much as there's this mirror image aspect through the columns, the real power comes when you're seeking coherence across the entire organization, really, so that my sense of membership comes also from some interaction with how the product is designed, for example, with the contribution aspect of the organization. All right. So I'm going to pause again. I have a couple of stories to share, and I'll refer to how those stories tie in with this framework, but I just want to pause one more time. Questions or comments?
Well, I just echo the comments in the chat box that this is awesome and really helpful way of organizing thinking and seeing the relationships between all the different parts.
Thank you for saying that, because I can't see the chat actually, so that's good.
And there is a curiosity if the slides will be available for people after the talk.
Yes, and I'll be available.
Great, even better.
Yeah, both. All right. Anybody else? Okay, let me share a story. So this is an organization I started working with several years ago. It's 4 nature museums that were merged administratively by the city, against their will, actually, but they were brought together. They're a biodome, an insectarium, a botanical gardens, and a planetarium. And a new director was placed over this newly merged institution, and his mandate was to create one brand that represented all of them. And his sense was that required one cohesive culture across all of them as well. So my colleague and I were hired to help with that mandate. And the first thing we did was to bring all 450 people from all 4 institutions together for a day. And throughout that day, we were inviting them into conversation to articulate all of those different fertile conditions. to imagine when this organization, this cohesive organization is fully thriving, what is that going to be like? And we didn't go through the grid, but that was the inspiration behind the topics that we invited them to explore. The overarching theme of the day was this: what is the one conversation you all want to have with the world? So what's the convergence, that exists between you? And really starting from heroic cause, what do you stand for? What do you all stand for? And what's the conversation and connection that you burn to build around that? And then we'll get to the offering. The offering is easy. So we went away after this day of listening to them, and we drafted a manifesto. And this is an important part of the work that we do in general, but we drafted a manifesto as a concise statement, a concise summary of all of the fertile conditions that have to be there. This is who we are. This is what we stand for, what we want as the difference we want to make in the world. And this is what has to be true if we're going to get what we want. So we brought it back to them, and we said, is this what you said? Does this seem accurate and authentic? And they said, it's really great. We like it. There's just one problem. You've used the word life. And we don't talk about life. We talk about nature, because we're scientists, and nature to us is out there somewhere, and it's measurable and tangible. But life is kind of amorphous. We don't really know. And so could you just change that one word? And my colleague and the director and I, we all said, wow, this is important. This is really interesting. Most of you are biologists, and you feel uncomfortable talking about life. And if you can't talk about life, who can? And if we can't talk about life, maybe our inability to talk about life is somehow connected to our decreasing ability to sustain life on the planet. Maybe that's actually the one conversation you need to have with the world, all of you. So they really took that to heart, and it took about 6 months of collective soul searching to come to terms with that. And in the end, they announced a new identity for themselves. They are now Espace pour la vie, which means space for life. So together, they each retained their individual identities, but together they form a space for life. And when I saw this, when they came out with this identity, I thought, this is amazing in many ways. One of the things that I love is that the word thrivability is impossible to translate into French, just doesn't translate. And so I saw this phrase, space for life, and I thought, that's the translation, espace pour la vie. This is the idea of crafting your organization as a space for life. So I really love that. All right, so it was more than just a name change. And in fact, they'll tell you it's not a brand, it's a conversation, it's a movement. So if we go back to the framework, one of the first things they did was to restructure the organization. Before this, human resources had been buried within finance and administration, as is really often the case. So they brought it out and created one pillar of their organizational chart, their organizational structure, that's called people and culture. And another one that's called visitor engagement. This is that customer piece of purpose. And then one that's called infrastructure. So they modeled their very organizational structure after the way that life works. Beyond that, they changed how they ran meetings. So previously they were a very heavy bureaucracy, and they're a city-owned organization. So you can imagine that it was very bureaucratic. Their meetings were almost exclusively in service of infrastructure. But as they came to see, that's not where the life is. They became diligent in monitoring the content of their meetings, so that most of the time spent in meetings was on things that people were passionate about, or things that were really coming from that could engage customers more fully. And in fact, they moved to engaging their customers and citizens of Montreal in strategic planning. There's an entire process of engagement in envisioning where do we go from here? How do we create our institutions as a space for life? So there's been a massive initiative to invite people into to contribute to that process. Let's see what else. Sorry. When you ask people about the meetings, and what it's like to focus on life and rather than being in service of infrastructure, they'll tell you that the meetings are so joyful and so full of life, and that there's so much more creativity now that it's almost more than they can keep up with. Things go from idea to implementation so quickly that it's almost too much, but it's fantastic, and they've shown a huge amount of innovation, including in their exhibits. Their exhibits are now much more engaging as well. So maybe the most impressive accomplishment of all in their transformation is that for 9 years they tried without success to raise enough money to renovate the planetarium, which sorely needed it, and but they were unable. After coming out with this new identity and new way of interacting with the world, they were able to raise in 1 year $190 million. They were able to build a new planetarium, LEED Platinum, and many more projects. So it was so compelling, that they were almost immediately able to attract all of this money. And they are just about untouchable within the City of Montreal budget. Every other city institution suffers from regular budget cuts, and now Space for Life really is nearly exempt from that. So it really paid off for them. All right. The next story, the last story that I have time for, is of a language school that's called Culture and Language Connections, CLC Montreal. And when I started working with them, they were actually amazing already. They were really impressive. And you feel it when you walk in to this school. It looks like everybody there is having a fantastic day every time I go, and you just think, how can that be? There's something about what they've created there that just really works. So the first thing I did was to sit in on a staff meeting, and I asked everyone around the table just to tell me, why do you work here? That was my question. And these are some of the answers. And I was just astonished at how much the language is connected with life. Leadership feels effortless, like breathing. You can almost feel the pulse of the place. It's amazing watching students blossom. Here it's alive. It's not a university. It's not the government. I had experience in those and it was dead. Here it's alive. So, there was something already there that was alive and thriving. And really it came from the director, AJ, who had lived in Asia, by the way. So he had this maybe exposure or just natural inclination. He had no business background, and he just sort of stewarded this organization in the way that felt right to him, that made sense to him, and it went against all the advice that he got about the right way to run a business. So when he met me and I shared all of this that I'm sharing with you, he was so relieved, and felt validated. Yes, there's research and there's sort of logic that I can then share with my staff to explain more and help them understand how they can act as stewards as well, more fully. So one of the things I like about his example is that he naturally entered through the doorway of heroic cause. He started with a mission to enable human connection, and then looked around to see, how could I contribute to that? And finally decided that language instruction was the best way to contribute to that. So when I asked him, why did you start the language school? He said, language is a tool that helps facilitate human connection. And you feel it somehow. It makes a big difference. So one of the things I helped them with was a tagline, a slogan for their school. And what I suggested, what they've adopted, is that it's the language school that feels like home no matter where you're from. And I find that actually an amazing accomplishment, that there are students who come from around the world and even within Montreal, but somehow we all feel at home there, and how can that be? How is it that we all feel at home? So if we go to the framework, part of it is in the structure. You know, I mentioned that when you walk in, it's beautifully designed. There's wood, there are big windows, there are plants. It's an open plan. So the structure supports that feeling of home. Part of it is in the systems that they have for teaching. They've developed their teaching practice as a craft, and their systems for monitoring student progress. So you really feel that you're in capable hands, and that helps you feel at home. Their teachers are really masterful, really excellent, and feel a deep sense of meaning because they are valued as well as part of the ecosystem. And the offering is excellent. And it's playful. It's not traditional language learning. There are classrooms, but it's conversational, it's flowing, it's learning almost along the way by accident. They have cooking classes, they have dance classes. There's something just fundamentally joyful and playful in how they speak, and full of life, how they teach. So 2 final things in this story. One is that I love that AJ, the director, never refers to the organization as an organization or a company. He always talks about the space. And it's totally unrelated to Space for Life, my first story. It's just the way that he thinks about it, that it's everything and everyone that is alive within the space that brings life to it. And I find that there's an Asian, a Japanese concept called ba that is really what he's talking about, that he talks about inviting people into the space and about listening to the space, listening for what the space needs. So I think this is a nice way of thinking about this aspect of stewardship, of listening to the fullness of this living ecosystem and everything that's alive there. The second detail that I would share is that in a bilingual city like Montreal, with people from all over the world who live here, language instruction is a pure commodity. There's a language school on every corner, on every telephone pole. There's somebody's flyer that says cheap language lessons, at my house or yours. And the government offers free language lessons. They so much want to encourage, especially French. So it's a really tough market to break into. And yet CLC thrives and is full and is profitable. And in less than 5 years, they've accomplished this. So I think there's sort of a point of evidence for the power of this approach. All right, again, I'd like to pause and just see, do you have questions or comments?
So yeah, this is Matthew. Michelle, thank you so much. I feel like you've kind of just put like 5 doors out there and then like opened them just a crack for us to walk through. So just super, super valuable, deep nurturing nutrients I feel like you've been sharing with us. So thank you so much. I would just be curious, like, how is this landing with people, looking at your life and at your work? How could that be incorporated? What are some of the questions you're holding? What are some of the things that are landing with you and you're going to be sitting with for a little while? I would love to hear, what is this new information, if it's new for you, or to what degree it's new? How is it sitting with you? What are you noticing?
Huh.
And I'm talking to the participants. I would love
to answer. And let me just say also, the next thing that we'll do is take 5 minutes or so for you to apply this to your project or your organization, and just some reflection time, and then come back in discussion. So
okay, so maybe we want to hold that little bit of conversation until that time.
It'll be a little bit more integrated. Right now it's at a theoretical level, but how about you and your organization or your project, or one that well, your local grocery store that you have some insight into. So I'd love to invite people to take 5 minutes and think about, it might be useful actually if you have a piece of paper just to sketch it out, not the content, but a sort of a grid. This is your garden, that you're planning out, and think in each of the categories, what's already really fertile, what's already thriving, what is there that's already in place and beautiful, and then what could use some tending, some cultivation, what else is possible. and really also then looking across at the connections that you can make across. How does that sound?
Great.
Okay.
Can you say the directions just one more time, and I'll write them here in the chat box for us?
So in thinking about your project or an organization that you know well, where is there already life thriving? What are the conditions that are present that are already strong? And where is there room for more cultivation? You know, what else is possible? And some people like to use this as a scorecard. You know, I saw one person who did a score out of 10 on each of these 9 boxes, or just notes to yourself in each of them. So we have about 2 minutes left. Does that feel like enough time? And enough time so that we can have some conversation about it. I'd love to hear where there's some insights that came up. What kinds of comments did you make for yourself, or just what were your thoughts in applying this to your own project? There was one question in the chat about practical play and asking for more clarification about why that's the infrastructure. So maybe I can answer that first.
I can say one quick thing before you answer that that's related.
Sure.
One of the things that the play actually was a great focus or inner for me around where is it thriving and where is it not, because where the play is really present and that aliveness, it was like, okay, those are places where things are thriving, and when that's not present, those are places where things aren't thriving and could be cultivated more.
Fantastic. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer to the question. To the person who raised that, does that help?
It looks like she can't talk.
Oh, darn. There haven't been many questions. Can people not talk?
Hi, this is Maddie.
Okay.
Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I also had a question. I feel like I had a really good understanding. Your explanation was very, very clear, and I was seeing a lot of things. But there was this also about the practical play that somehow still doesn't click completely, and is what you were saying about the trunk being mostly dead, and it's just this little thin line of life. And I'm not sure. I think I have a feeling for it, but I would like to hear more about. Because it seemed to me that that's like a very important part, that is the relationship between the passion and the purpose and the roots and the fruit. But it's very interesting to me that it's mostly dead. So I'd like to hear more about that and how, and again, it seems like this very thin line is very subtle and very, important at the same time, and why is it surrounded by death?
Yeah, and it's not totally accurate to say that it's dead. It's not actively living. There is life there. There is energy there in trees, in real trees. But it's the reason I put so much emphasis on it is that we have the risk of worshiping infrastructure, of worshiping the processes at the expense of the people, really at the expense of being in service of life and thriving in the world. That's been the dominant pattern in our organizations. So recognizing that the infrastructure generally is there just to support and connect. It's not the purpose for us coming together. The purpose is something larger and something that's alive. The purpose is to create more thriving and more aliveness around ourselves. So it's really just to make sure that our attention is appropriately directed and that we give an appropriate level of reverence to infrastructure. It is important. There is this, life that flows through, but in service and in support of connecting us.
Thank you. That makes sense.
I loved Ashley's contribution. Maybe somebody else has thoughts as well.
Well, and there is still confusion if you could say more about what exactly do you mean by practical play in the trunk? So I think you're talking to it some, but maybe just say all of that again in a different way.
Well, at a really specific level, I work with some people from the world of applied improvisation. So there are ways to bring games into meetings and literal playfulness. And, that's a very literal way of bringing play. The Applied Improvisation Network is distinct from just theatrical improvisation. This is applied to human endeavor, to helping us achieve our goals. It's what I would say is literally practical play.
Mm-hmm.
So that aspect, and then there's just kind of an attitude as well that we're here to learn. We come together to have experience joy and learning most of all. So let's, as Ashley said, let's check in and see if that's our experience. It's in service of our goals. We do want to achieve something together, but we also really literally want to have fun while we're doing it as often as we can. And even in the tough times, sometimes even in a game, you're down and that's okay. That's part of the game. So there's sort of an invitation here to take ourselves a little less seriously in some ways, but without losing our drive for that heroic cause as well. Just to see it's a game. It's an important game, but let's make it fun when we can. Does that help? Okay.
I got a yes.
Great.
One thing, maybe while I'm unmuted, is one thing that really stood out to me while you were talking was the how you pushed back with that consulting around the word life. And I just brought up for me the courage to push back in service to life, because we're often so entrenched in this machine model that it does take, that stewardship is actually a very active role. And it just made me also wonder about, and that's where I was like, well, maybe this fits into stewardship, but it feels like there's some, when it comes to truly living this paradigm of living systems, whether it means like pushing back in service to the biodiversity or pushing back in service to the aliveness, that there's some courage that is inherent in stepping into this paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Very much so, to the point that I noticed that my accompaniment and consulting support of individual organizations wasn't enough because of the courage it required of them, really. And so it became clear we needed a community of practice so that they could learn from each other and find courage from each other to do things differently. So yes, I have had to draw on my own courage a lot over the last 15 years, and I find it's important to be in this intention and practice with others as well, so that we find the courage. And just about this framework, we're skimming through, and I've tried to give as enough that it can be useful, that you can just have the slides and check in over time on how your project, your organization is doing. I'd love to have opportunities to do it, to accompany groups over time as well with this, in this kind of a format, because it's something that you deepen into and you find more courage for as well.
Could you talk a little bit to the process, Michelle? Wait,
hold on. Caroline's trying to speak, and I had muted her because there was some background noise. So if you can hold on 1 second, Matthew, if you don't mind. Let me just see if I can unmute. Okay, Caroline, try again, see if that worked.
Oh, thank you very much. I was really wondering about introducing the model in organizations that are not predisposed to the language that you've laid out for us, or even the idea of an organization as a living system. So
that has to be my question too. So thank you.
Yay.
It's pretty challenging. It's and maybe impossible. It's without the openness, the lens that Matthew talked about at the very beginning, to be able to see beyond a linear process and to see a systems perspective. It's really hard for people to understand this. At the same time, it can be used as a checklist. So my husband, who comes from traditional big consulting firms, loves this framework, but sees it as something just at a surface level practically useful. I can check off these things, and that's fine. That's valuable. I'm interested in working with organizations that want to go into the depths of that intention and practice of thrivability.
I wonder too about like some of the results. I mean, you know, unfortunately that language of trying to raise money for 9 years and then raising $109 million, that's results that could be a doorway into sometimes the shift of thinking will actually change the shift of output.
Yeah, it's true. It helps. It helps to have those kinds of accomplishments to talk about. I worked with a dental clinic early on, and they were only able to go so far, and it was useful for them. They got name tags. We did a new logo and a new name that was more expressive of what they were passionate about. But when we discovered that their business model was incoherent with what they were passionate about, that they were passionate about encouraging greater oral health, but they made their money on root canals, you know, I tried to engage them in a conversation about how that could be made more coherent, and that was just going too far for them. So at some point, we find a limit to how far we can go, and that's fine. We all have limits, you know.
What my area is in the education field, and one thing I've noticed over time is that it really is a getting the ball rolling kind of thing. You're going to only find the organizations that feel synergy with what you're doing at first, but as it diffuses, people, I think more openness comes.
Yeah.
So that, you know, have you seen that in terms of your community in Montreal, for example, or in terms of the group that's out of Berlin? As you're building this community of organizations that are interested in thrivability, you know, is that helping to use the Mycelium model? Are you all nourishing each other? Are you spreading out? Are there more people coming on board?
Absolutely. It's just so refreshing, so encouraging, really encouraging to find more and more people, and to be able, it creates critical mass, you know. It's not just one lone nut. We can't all be crazy. So that's been very, very helpful. And I think we're getting better at telling the story as well, building bridges for people. So one of the things that was in the invitation to this webinar was that we can explore together this aspect of stewardship. I'm happy to have whatever conversation in the last few minutes, but just does anybody have thoughts about stewardship and what that involves? Or anything you'd like to talk about.
I'm curious around if you're already working with an organization that is very resonant with the principles, really kind of on board, and it's taking it from, okay, I'm in, we're doing a couple things here and there, not fully integrated, but very much wanting, a lot of energy moving in that direction. What are some questions, or what would be your process in partnering with an organization like that to really help them deepen into clarity, into coherence, into organizational strategy and effectiveness with this within this natural system?
Okay. So there's an organization that's a raw vegan organic food product company here, and they were the first to create an internal community of stewards. So that was one way to deepen and integrate, to bring the conversation from the leaders really solidly into at least a representation of the rest of the organization, 18 people from across the organization who meet regularly, to be in this practice of stewardship together and learn and develop the company. Another nice example from that organization is that as we were writing their manifesto, we invited the ecosystem to participate, their ecosystem, meaning customers and peers and financial shareholders and others in a really dynamic day-long discussion. So if I think about this framework not as the gardening plot, but as a bingo card, it was like they were able to put tokens on membership among the employees. I feel like I belong with these people at every level, and this is meaningful. Hearing from customers and peer companies what they love about our company. And it created a system of conversation. Let's have these meetings regularly. It built connection. It gave them product development ideas. It helped with their contribution and the sense of heroic cause. It enabled them to learn. It was a practice of sustainability. So the more there can be integration and coherence across all of these aspects, the more thriving it creates. Does that touch on your question?
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate the bingo metaphor. It's like, okay, just drop into one of those and say, okay, what are we doing well here, and how could we improve, and what could that look like, and bringing the stakeholders on board for that conversation sounds great.
And with any move that you make, how can we nourish multiple parts of our garden, in just one move?
Right.
Yeah.
So looking at like structure. Okay, how does structure relate to systems, relate to contributions as well?
Right, exactly. We're doing a new, that company actually has a new factory, new facility that they're building. So, that's new structure. How do we design the architecture of it so that it supports all the other aspects of the living organization?
Great.
It seems like a big part of your process and how you work is your engagement techniques. For a lot of the solutions that you've given, there's very specific and strategic ways that you're engaging people. That could probably be a whole nother workshop, but I want to honor how you do that and also acknowledge that.
Thank you. So I'm part of the global art of hosting community of practice. So for me, hosting is stewardship, and pretty explicit within that community as well, that we're hosting whatever is alive for this group of people. So there's a lot of that. As much as I said earlier, there's not anything prescriptive. I'm not telling you how to do any of these things, but I can say for a human being, you need to exercise. You need human connection. I can say these things. You decide how you're going to achieve those. So it's sort of similar here. I can say you need to invite people to feel mastery. You figure out how to do that. You need to figure out nourishing systems, and it's up to you, ideally together, across the ecosystem to design and to continue to sense that over time as circumstances change. So yeah, there's something about hosting.
Yeah. I'll put in a little plug. We have an Art of Hosting happening November 11th through the 13th on the art of learning together and creating learning environments. So if you're interested to learn more, let us know.
I recommend it. If Dana is on the call, we've used a model that Dana developed, especially to dive deeper into stewardship. She has a Lotus model that I find just exquisite. I really love it. So there are lots of different methodologies and practices that can be woven into this.
Dana gives a hello and thank you. I think she might have to be muted for certain reasons right now.
Mm-hmm. So I think we only have a few minutes left. Matthew, do you want to do the what are you taking away round?
Sure, yeah. So let's do this as quickly as possible, just to be mindful of everyone's time, as we do just have a couple minutes left. So yeah, let's do it like this. If you feel that there's something really powerful and evocative that you're going to take away from Michelle's talk, Michelle's presentation, anything that she shared, just take maybe, a sentence or two and share that with the collective. And before we do that, I just want to acknowledge that if you did find value from this workshop, please make a contribution. And again, we'll be spending a little time in about 5 minutes just hosting another window for people to give feedback. But if you do care to make a financial contribution, you can do so on the registration page. Ashley, is there a make a contribution there button, do you know?
No, it's just on our, I'll put a link for our Mycelium contribution page.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's transition. And I would also, I'll just kick us off. And one of the things that I've noticed that I'm so taking away is that you're bringing the cambium here, and we as mycelium are the root system that is linking into the roots of the tree of the cambium, taking the nutrients that you've been developing, Michelle, for the past 10 years, 15 years, and distributing that throughout the soil, throughout this, living ecosystem. So I'm just super appreciative that we have the opportunity to connect in with your work and be able to create a channel to transfer it to our community at large. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yeah, what are you going to take away with you is the question, and just hop on in.
Sorry, this is Mary. I feel I'm taking with me clarity in how I can look how I want to make my contributions, and how can I even create a system that aligns with my values and with what I really want to bring into the world. And I feel this is helping me very much to almost start putting in every single of these squares, downloading what is it inside of me, and it's helping me to see it. So it's clarity very much. Thank you so much.
This is Caroline and Michelle. I'd like to thank you so much for this, and actually take you up on an offer for a continued conversation. I'm working with several others in the Art of Participatory Leadership community on a project now that could really benefit from this model. So I'm excited and grateful for another way of thinking about the work that I'm doing, which is also an education and an engagement around equity and justice in education.
You got it. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Karen speaking. Michelle, thank you so much. Yeah, I got a new perspective actually on the DNA framework. Mm-hmm. Although being on the quest, I think your wording and allowed me to have a new perspective on the DNA framework model. And what I love so much about it is that you can start anywhere. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to start top management, or you can also start on the level of passion, with employees. And that allows you to, I think, start in multiple areas of the organization. And so they can create different spots and maybe find each other. Mm-hmm. I find that really powerful. Thank you. Happy to continue the conversation.
So we're about out of time. So just to be mindful of people's schedules, if you have to go, this would be a good time to do it. If you can stick around, we'll get a couple more kind of what are you taking away with you? How are you integrating this back into the world? And then it would be wonderful if you could stay another 10, 15 minutes to engage in a conversation around feedback, bringing those nutrients back to Michelle from what we've got.